Welcome and thank you so much for visiting. This is Jenna from McGuire. So today I am going to share with you some really fun techniques for adding texture to your stamping using a die to make an impression. Now this is, most of my examples today involve background stamps and background dies, but you could definitely do this with other stamps and dies you have. And I'm going to have a lot of other tips and fun ideas for you along the way, so I hope you'll learn something new. Now I've got a bunch of examples once again, so it's a longer video, but I think each one shows a little something different. Let's start with this example here, using a background rainbow stamp and making an impression with the die. If you look closely, there are arches impressed in between the color stripes. It's hard to capture in the video and especially in photos, but in real life it makes a big difference on a simple card. For this card and several others, I'll be using the new Pinkfresh Studio Pop-Out Rainbow Stamp. In this video, I'll be using lots of different pop-out designs from them. These are cling stamps that are actually cut, so you can just stamp different parts of it at different times and in different colors. So you can change how they are arranged, whatever you want, and easily put it back together how it was originally intended. So you'll see lots of techniques with these. Now, instead of peeling this all off of the clear paper that it comes on, the acetate that it comes on, I am instead leaving it on there instead of, risking unassembling them when I don't need to. And I'm just putting tape on the clear part around it and then pressing that into my MISTI door. You could definitely remove the cling stamp and cling it to the door if you wanted. Doesn't matter. You'll see me do both today. Okay, so now I want to do a rainbow on a bunch of different pieces, and I just want to ink up one color at a time, or one arch at a time. So instead of removing them all, I just remove the pieces around the arch that I want to stamp, just so I have enough room to get an ink pad on it. I feel like if I leave the others in place, I don't risk as much them kind of going wonky, so I find it better to do, and it's actually faster. So I'm using Pinkfresh Studio die inks today. They just come in really beautiful, berry, happy kind of colors, and I thought they would be great for these happy images. Now, I thought it'd also be fun to do an example where I stamp it once and then rotate my paper and stamp it again, so I could get these overlapping arches. But then on some others, I just stamped once. I did a bunch of examples. I'm not going to show all the stamping, but you'll see the results later. Now it's time to move to the next arch. I put the little frame piece around it back on. You really don't need to do that. I'm just trying to make sure that I don't let the arches go wonky, but it ended up being easier to prevent that than I thought. So you don't have to take all those precautions, just move on to the next one. They butt up against each other very easily, and you can see where they used to be attached, so it's easy to line up. Okay, so now I'm going in with this one and I'm stamping it with a light orange ink, and you can see I'm doing some where it's just a single arch rainbow and then some pieces where the arches overlap because I turn it and stamp it again. So I continue to do this with additional colors. Although this is a rainbow, you can definitely just do arch colors here. So in this one, didn't do rainbow colors, just some pinks, oranges, and yellows. There you can see how cool the overlapping one is looking. So I continued to do all of the arches, and then I just reassembled them back on the cling release sheet, and it's good to go for later. Okay, now it's time to make that impression in the white cardstock between the color arches. To do that, I am using the Pinkfresh Studio Rainbow die. This happens to coordinate with the arches that we just stamped, so you can use them together or separately. If you don't have a die that coordinates with your stamping, don't worry, I'll give you another idea of adding texture a little bit later on. To make an impression with your die, you need to set up your die cut machine according to the instructions included. All die cut machines can do this. I'm using my Spellbinders Platinum. For that, you have that tan embossing mat that you put down on your platform. On top of that, I'm putting a piece of typing or printer paper, so really thin paper. Then I'm putting the rainbow die on top. What will happen is the die will make an impression in the typing paper because I had that embossing mat in there. That way it doesn't cut, it makes an impression. Now this isn't going to make a great impression because this is thin, cheap paper, but I want that. I'm going to use it as a guide to line up my stamped rainbow with the rainbow die. So here we have one of our stamped rainbows, and I'm going to take that typing paper piece that we made the impression in, and I'm going to line it up over the stamping. Now it's hard to see in the video, but I can actually see through that paper there because it's so thin. And I'm just lining up the impression on the thin paper with the stamping behind it. Once I have it lined up, I can lay these down together onto our embossing mat. Then I can take the die and just pop it right in place. It'll be able to kind of fit right into the impression on that thin paper. Then I put my embossing plate on top and run it through. This will make an impression on our stamped rainbow. And look at that. Isn't that cool how it adds those arches in between the stamping? It looks even better in real life. I could have done the impression first and then stamped, but I thought these results were better. Okay, here's another way you can do it. Instead of using typing paper or printer paper, you can also use vellum. That way you can see through it easily, but I didn't know if everyone had vellum or wanted to waste it for this. So there you can see I'm lining up the vellum impression right over our stamping. This is another stamped piece. Popping that die in place and running that through with the embossing plate on top. By the way, this is another stamped rainbow, not the exact one that I already did an impression on. I did a bunch of stamping off screen. And there you go. Check out how cool that looks. I just love it. So there are the two different ways that I found worked well, either the thin paper or using vellum. Here's another thing I figured out. If you trace your die first onto your vellum, it makes it easier. So I'm going to do it again. I'm starting over here. Traced my die on it. Now I'm going to run it through with the embossing plate on top to make the impression on the vellum. This is just a scrap piece of vellum I had. So I'll run that through. It's not going to make a great impression because this is just going to kind of tear through that thin vellum. But now, when I line this up with my next stamped image, this is a flat piece of stamped cardstock, I can easily put my die in place because I traced it, and it'll pop right into the impression on the vellum. Now, once again, I could have done the impression first and tried to line up my stamping with it. But with this particular Stampin' Die, I found it easier to do it this way. I will show you the other way with other stamps and dies later in this video, so you can decide which would work with what products you have. Okay, so now I thought it'd be fun to try it with a background where I did arches in two directions, and it actually worked. I didn't think it would. So I'm lining up my impressed vellum with one of the rainbows, popping the die in place, putting the embossing plate on top and running it through. Well, now we're going to rotate it and do an impression on the other arch or the other rainbow. I thought that when I did this, the second pass through of doing the impression would flatten the first rainbow's impression, but it didn't. It actually left it there enough that you can still see it. So say you stamped two little birds on a card. You could use the coordinating die to make an impression around one, then run it through again and make an impression around the other. See, you can see the impressed arches going in both directions. So you can take multiple passes. Okay, now if you don't have a die that coordinates with your stamping, you could use a completely different die to make an impression on top. Here I had a stamped rainbow, and then I took a floral background die and did an impression right on top of the rainbow, and it just adds this cool texture to that simple background. Now the impression was a little deep, and I noticed my paper looked like it was starting to get rough in certain spots. A trick for that is to just rub your bone folder across it. It flattens it out and makes it look nice and smooth again, but you still have that beautiful impression. So even though the floral doesn't line up with the rainbow, it still gives beautiful, cool looking texture. Here's another example. This is another flat piece of white cardstock with a rainbow stamped on it. I'm using this Hexagon die, which you'll see me use again later in this video. Just placing it right over the rainbow, running it through, and it just adds texture to it. So say you have any simple stamped background, all you need to do is use a background die to make an impression on top, and it adds that fun look. Okay, let's go ahead and complete these rainbow cards. For some of them, I used the Pinkfresh Studio Classic Word die set. This is an older die set with lots of words. It includes beautiful, congrats, thank you, best wishes, hello, hooray, happy birthday, and celebrate. And the shadow die is included. So I used hello a few times today. I also used the sentiment "You Amaze Me" from this Pinkfresh Studio Take Pride stamp set. There are a lot of unique encouragement stamps in this one, so I've been using it a lot. So I went ahead and I arranged everything on the front of a pink piece of pink cardstock. And the pink cardstock that I used happened to be pretty thin, and the front of my card was pretty heavy. Now, if you have that happen and your card is a little floppy, what you can do is add a piece of white cardstock on the inside, and it makes that back part of the card stronger. It makes a big difference. So what I did on the front of the card here is I trimmed down the background, added the sentiments, and then I put some additional pieces of cardstock behind the stamped panel. There's 3 additional pieces back there so that it's popped up off of our pink note card, which happens to be 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. For the hello, I die cut the shadow twice from white cardstock and glued them together. Then I die cut the word hello twice from white cardstock and once from glitter gold cardstock, glued those together and put them on top. So you can see there's a lot of added dimension on here by stacking pieces. It makes a big difference with a simple card like this. I also stamped "You Amaze Me," and you can see that fun impression that we get in the background because we did the die impression along with the stamping. I've been mass producing cards for a community center near us, and I'm going to do a bunch in this design with some blues and greens and then change out the sentiment underneath the hello. I think that would be a good design to mass produce. Okay, let's look at another card that we created before. In this one, I stamped the rainbow twice overlapping and did the impression twice. So you can see all of those embossed arches going in both directions in the background. Such a unique look. To finish it off, I added it to a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch pink note card. Behind the stamped panel, I have 3 additional pieces of white cardstock that were actually scraps, some leftovers, and that builds up the background and gives a little bit of dimension. I also used the friend die from a stamp set that I'm going to show you in a little bit, and you can see I used pink glitter cardstock on the top. And then I added a stamped sentiment strip underneath it along with some gemstones. Okay, another one of my rainbow cards. This is the one that I used the floral background die to make an impression on top of it. I decided to keep the rest of this card very simple because of that texture. I actually created a note card from holographic cardstock. It's that sparkly, crazy shine on the outside and white on the inside, so it's perfect to make a note card. I also used that on the hello die cut. So I have 3 white die cuts stacked for the shadow, 2 white die cuts stacked for the hello with the holographic cardstock on top. Very simple design, but because of the texture and that shiny paper, it adds a lot of interest. Now my next card doesn't have a die impression on it, but I wanted to show you this because these dies are back in stock and I have made a bunch of cards with this flap card design for all the cards that I'm mass producing, and I really wanted to show you because a lot of people are asking about it when I share the cards over on Instagram. For this card, I used these Pinkfresh dies that are intended for slimline cards, long, narrow cards. But I actually use them to create flaps on the front of my normal size cards too. So I'm just going to demonstrate it with one of my leftover rainbow pieces. I used the bottom of the large ornate banner die to cut from one of my rainbow pieces, and you can see it even does some piercing around the outside edge. I'm scoring it near the top to create a flap, and I'm using my bone folder to reinforce that fold. Now on the back of that flap, I'm putting strong adhesive. You can either use a strong liquid adhesive or double-sided tape. And I'm going to wrap that around a piece of cardstock. This cardstock is a little bit smaller than 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. Next, I'm going to put adhesive on the back of that pink cardstock, that backing, and on the back of the flap. And now I'll add it to a white piece of cardstock that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So you can see how there's a little white trim around the edge. This card does not open like a normal card. Instead, the flap lifts up to reveal the message. So I used one of the other dies in the set and trimmed it down to create an area to write underneath the flap too. You could skip that if you wanted to and just write on the pink. On the flap, I added a hello die cut sentiment with stacked die cuts for dimension. That's from this Phrase Builder Hello die set that I've used many times in videos. In this die set, we have the words hello, friend, beautiful, handsome, lovely, bestie, and gorgeous, and the shadow dies for them. and I'll use those a few times throughout this video. I used the hello here, white for the shadow, black for the word itself, and I put glossy accents on top of the black to make it shine. I also added a few iridescent gemstones, which pick up the colors around them on the card so they match anything. I also white heat embossed You Are My Rainbow on black cardstock and placed that underneath, and that is from the Pinkfresh Studio Simply Sentiments Hello stamp set. You've seen this before in my videos too, and I'll be using it later on. A lot of really encouraging sentiments in here that I've been using a lot lately. Okay, let's step away from the rainbows for a bit and let's do a diamond background. If you look closely around those gold heat embossed lines, there is an impression of the diamond pattern. For this card, I used the Pinkfresh Studio Pop-Out Diamond stamp. Check this out. It has this diamond grid, and each of the pieces between pop out. There's sentiments that you can use. There are different floral images. You can repeat them. You can replace them. You can do whatever you want. Only stamp some of them, and you'll see me kind of change things up as we go. I'm also using the Pinkfresh Studio's diamond background die that's on the left that lines up with this stamp. Now, if you want to cut out the flowers on the stamp, there's even coordinating dies for those flowers. So many things that work really well and brilliantly together. This time I decided to take the stamp off of the clear release paper and just put it into my Misty stamping tool. And now I'm going to remove all of the diamonds, so I just have the grid. Before I do our card example, I want to show you how to easily stamp this grid onto the coordinating die cut like you see here. I'm not using this for my card, but I think people might wonder how to do this, and I tried many things, and this was the most accurate. I'm taking something clear packaging, clear recycling. I'm just using a stamp pocket, and I put that into the corner of my Misty, there on the left. Now I'm inking up my stamp with whatever ink you want, any color, doesn't matter, and I'm stamping it on the clear. Just be sure not to touch it, it'll smear, but you can see it there. Now I've used the diamond background die and die cut it from white cardstock. I'm going to lift up my clear piece, line up the stamping on the clear with the die cut. I have a little adhesive on the back of my die cut, so I'm going to press it down, remove the clear piece and wipe it clean. And now our die cut is positioned in our stamping tool where you can stamp directly on it. Really makes it easier to do this. I wanted to demonstrate this first before we do our technique. I found it better to do this where you die cut first and then stamp than to try to stamp and then die cut. Just happened to work out well for me. Okay, so now let's go to the card. I'm going to do an impression first before we do all the stamping and die cutting. So here I have the die with my white cardstock and the embossing mat. I put my embossing plate on top and I'm running it through, and that makes an impression on the white cardstock. I trimmed it down, and now it's time to do stamping. Now I want to stamp this diamond, the solid diamond, in different colors in the different openings. So I just easily line it up with the impression that we have on the cardstock. It's hard to see in the video, but it's there in real life and easy to see. So I'm going to do different colors. So here I'm doing an orange color, stamped it again to make it a little darker, and watch this. You can rotate it and stamp in the diamond that's diagonally across from it, which is a great time saver instead of having to move it for each one. So I'm going to continue to do this until all of the diamonds are stamped in. Now remember, there were lots of different diamond pattern options included in that stamp set that I could use. I just took all the others out to use this, but think of all the different options you could do. Okay, so now I want to stamp the grid onto our impressed background. I put some temporary adhesive on the back. I still have my clear sheet that I stamped on before. I'm going to line up my impression around the stamping, press it down, remove the clear, and now I can stamp the grid onto my background. Well, I decided to do gold embossing here. I thought that'd be fun, so I used my anti-static powder tool, stamping with Versamark ink, adding gold embossing powder, and heat setting. So this stamping will be in between the impression lines that we did and the stamping of the colored diamonds. Such a cool way to build up a background and make it extra special. You can keep cards with backgrounds like this very simple, and there's a lot to see and a lot of texture. So now I decided I wanted to white heat emboss flowers on top of my colored diamonds. So I placed them in the outline of the stamp, Remove the outline. Now I'm stamping these with Versamark ink, adding white embossing powder, and then heat setting it. Then I will move the flowers to the other diamonds and continue to do that. And I left the middle diamond open because that's where my sentiment will go. I ended up white heat embossing UR, which is part of the pop-up cling diamond set. And then I added a stacked lovely die cut with glitter cardstock on top, and that's from the Phrase Builders die set I showed you earlier. I trimmed my background down and added it onto some gold cardstock that I had, and then onto a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. And finally, I added little white pearls here and there on the flowers. So with this technique, we made an impression and did lots of different stamping on the background, and it pulls everything together nicely. That's the nice thing about these products I use today. But remember, you can do this with any stamp image and coordinating die to make an impression. I will link to a video that shows an idea for doing that, so you can try that if you want to. Okay, my next example is my favorite from the bunch because it's just so happy, and I think anybody would love to get something this happy in their mail. So I'm going to make more of these later, and it's really easy to do. Now for this one, I use the Pinkfresh Studio Pop Out Sunburst background stamp. This is another cling stamp where the center pops out, each of the rays pop out, then you have the frame around the edge of just the rubber cling that holds it all together, which really helps you to put it back together easily. I'm also using the Pinkfresh Studio Pop Out Sunburst die. So this coordinates perfectly, but you can use these separately too if you wanted. So let's start by making the impression first on white cardstock. I have my embossing mat, my white cardstock, my die face down, and then the embossing plate on top. And there you can see our sunburst impression. And then I trim that down with my trimmer. Now I have my sunburst here. Instead of taking it apart and putting it on the door of my MISTI, I'm once again taping the cling release paper onto it. It just makes it easier. And now it's time to do that trick to line it up. So I have some clear packaging here. Remember, you can just wipe this off with a dry cloth when you're done. Put it in the corner of my MISTI. Inked up my stamp just a little bit, just so I could see where the pattern is. Now I have my impressed background, taking that white insert out, sorry. I have my impressed background. I'm going to put some adhesive on the back so it'll hold into our MISTI. I'm putting this behind our stamping on the clear and lining it up. Then you hold those together and put the corner of the clear into the corner of your MISTI where you originally had it. Press down onto your impressed background. So I'm just going to press it right in place when it sits lined up completely. Remove the clear part and wipe it clean. And now we can stamp onto our impressed background. It'll line up. Again, you could do your stamping, then line up with the die for the impression, but I thought this was easier and more accurate. Next, I'm going to do different rays in different colors, just randomly here. You could do a rainbow, you could do a pattern, whatever you want, but I decided to just do random different shades of orange and yellow. So here's my first round of orange. I had a little bad inking there, so I'm just going to go ahead and double stamp it. Then I will take the other rays, pop them back in place, and remove our original rays that we've already stamped. Then I will stamp those with a different color ink. You can see how these easily go back together, so you can make sure that they line up with the rubber stamp you just stamped before you take that off. So you can see how I'm just building a sun here. You could also make a stencil out of a die cut and put some glitter paste over this. All kinds of ideas you can do with this, but I like the impression on the white cardstock between our stamping. So here's a look at the completed card. I just added it to a note card, added a lot of gemstones to the sun rays, which I just think adds some fun sparkle, but you could do little drops of glossy accents instead if you wanted, or use a shimmer pen. I used that Phrase Builder Hello die set that I showed you earlier. And I stacked together white die cuts and a gold glitter die cut. And then I gold heat embossed Sending Love, which is from the diamond pop-out stamp set that I showed you earlier. And it worked nicely with the Hello. This one worked particularly well because you can see that impression. It makes it look like the rays are popped out. Okay, so let's do another example. This time I've got another trick for you that you can do with lots of different dyes, and it's something fun to do with ink blending. Now for this, I'm using another one of the new pop-out stamps and dies from Pinkfresh Studio. This is the Hexagons. So you have the coordinating die and stamp set, and you can use them together or separately. All those little hexagons pop out so that you can change up the look each time or use a different sentiment or skip these sentiments and add a different one. By the way, if you do not have a stamping tool for cling stamps like this, I recommend putting the cling stamp upside down on your work surface, inking it, and laying the paper on top. Okay, now this time I'm once again going to do an impression first. So I'm using the Hexagon background die, ran it through with my embossing mat, trimmed it down. Now I've put some adhesive on the back. I have my clear piece here where I stamped the hexagon outline that you see on the right onto it. So I'm just lining it up in the corner of my stamping tool, removing the clear part, and now I can be sure that when I stamp that hexagon grid, it lines up with the impression we've made on our cardstock. Same thing I did with the last example. This time I used my anti-static powder tool and Versamark, but instead used silver embossing powder. So now I have a silver heat embossed line in between the impressions on the background. Okay, now for a fun little idea here. This works great with background dies that have openings or other dies also. What you can do is ink over your background die itself. So I have my embossed piece and I'm lining it up with my background die. So it just kind of pops in there and I'm going to tape it in place. I am not going to die cut with this. Instead, I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to apply ink over those openings. So I'm using a blending brush and some Pinkfresh Studio inks, not doing a great blend. I want this to kind of look uneven and a little fuzzy, I guess you would say. I could have stamped it or done very clean inking if I wanted to, but I just wanted a soft kind of look. So I'm using masking tape and moving that around so I don't ink up the other hexagons around the one that I'm working on, but you could definitely ink up this whole piece if you wanted. So once I'm done, I'll just wipe the back of my die clean and I can use it for die cutting in the future. So look at your dies that you have. You can use them on the back of it as kind of a stencil to go over your die cut or your impression that I'm doing here. Okay, so I did different colors in blues and greens. Once I was done, I can remove the die and look at all of those inked hexagons that fit perfect in between the impression and the embossing we've already done. Next, I wanted to do some flower stamping using some of the little hexagons that I popped out of the hexagon background die. And I'm stamping the flowers in the same color ink that I inked underneath them with. So this is going to be very subtle. If you want these to stand out more, you want to use a darker ink. I use the same color of ink and I double stamped them so it was a little bit darker, but it will still be very subtle. So here you can see the subtle stamping. I thought that was a fun kind of soft, cloudy look. And then I went and I traced over the stamping with a glitter pen just so that it would catch the light nicely. I added that background onto a scrap of silver glitter cardstock and then onto a white note card. In the center there, I used the Hello die cut that I've used many times in this video and added glossy accents on top of the blue Hello. I decided to go back and add a few little white dots to the center of the flowers too, just to make them pop. It's really fun to use your dies and your stamps all together in different ways. Okay, now for a few diagonal backgrounds, and this goes along with everything that we've been doing, but I wanted to show you how easy these particular diagonal stripes were to use. So I have the Pinkfresh Studio diagonal stripe background die, which I've used before in a video, and I'll link to it here. But now they have the pop-out diagonal stripe stamp that goes with it perfectly. So you can use these together separately. I have my diagonal stripes in my Misty stamping tool with some white cardstock. I'm removing some of the diagonal stripes so that I can get to inking just one of them, and then I'll stamp it. Now, I originally was planning to do a plaid with this, but I messed it up, so I just didn't have time to redo it. So I'm just going to do some diagonal stamping here. So I did my first stripe in pink on a few pieces of cardstock, and now I'm moving on to the next diagonal stripe, and I'll ink that up with my next color and stamp that on my different pieces of cardstock so that I could quickly create rainbow backgrounds. Now, on some of my examples, I stamped the entire piece, and on other examples, I just stamped some of the diagonal stripes. Keep in mind, you could keep like 3 or 4 stripes down and ink those in the same color, maybe have alternating color stripes. Lots of things you can do with these stamps. Okay, after I stamped a bunch of backgrounds, it's time to do the impression. So first I have a piece of typing paper here because I couldn't find any more vellum. And so I've traced the die onto my typing paper. Make sure the die is in that tracing, have it on an embossing mat, putting my embossing plate on top, and there we have our guide impression on some printer paper. Now I'm going to line it up with my rainbow diagonal stamped background so I can kind of see through it there, put it back on the embossing mat, put the die in place. It pops right into the impression, and I can also use the pen guide to make sure it's there. Put the embossing plate on top and make an impression once again. So now I have a diagonal impression around our diagonal stamping, and I just think that really steps up that background. Now on this one, I have a full stamp background, which is just so cool looking. I love it. I can't wait to do more of this and do some plaid. Oh, to do plaid would be so pretty. And I'm going to make an impression on this one too. So after I'm done, I have these two backgrounds that would have otherwise been flat and simple with those colored stripes. Now I have texture. There you can see where I started my plaid, but I messed up that one green and I have to start over, but I ran out of time. So I just have to save that for another day. Okay, so let's look at the completed cards with these. Very simple, added to a white note card. I stamped Birthday Girl from the stamp set that I showed you earlier, and then I used the beautiful die cut, which again, I stacked several die cuts thick so that I would have lots of dimension, and I covered the black with glossy accents. This is another one of my favorite designs that could be used for many occasions. So you can make a bunch of backgrounds, put them on note cards, and then wait until you have a particular occasion. Add the die cut word in the stamping and you're good to go. So that's a good one to mass produce too. Here's my other diagonal background. When I tilt it in the light here, you can see those impressions in between the colorful stamp stripes. Now I trimmed that down, added it to a note card, added the stacked hello die cut, and you can see my glossy accents are still even wet on top of the black hello die cut. I stamped a sentiment strip, added that below it, and then a few black gemstones. So this one you could do in different colors. Again, you could save time by putting down a few stripes, inking them up in the same color and stamping them, and then switching to other stripes, inking those up in the same color. But I decided to do each stripe pretty much a different color. I didn't plan out ahead of time. Now I did want to show you there was one more combo set here. You can buy these separate or together that I didn't get a chance to use in the video, but would be great for a plaid. So here we have the straight stripes pop out stamp, and it coordinates with a straight stripes die also. So any of the techniques that I did today, you could do with that. And remember, I still have a bunch of pieces left over. I made so many. In this video, I have these left over that I can use another time. Just wanted to show you how these all looked also. All right, there you have a way to combine your stamping with your dies to get an impression that lines up. You can even ink over it if you wanted. So if you are interested in these products, they are linked below in my YouTube description. Go to my blog because I have a discount code and an opportunity for a freebie that Pinkfresh Studio is doing at the time of this video posting. In the middle here are a couple other die impression videos that I think you might like. Thank you for spending this time with me. Have a wonderful weekend, stay safe, and we'll see you again soon.